Today we have an author, a pagan, an anarchist, a satirist, a comedian, I would say as well, in some ways. I've seen you do comedy, so therefore you're a comedian. A bit of a comedian. And a philosopher, and definitely a free thinker, Thomas Sheridan.
Hello everybody. I'm not, should I look relaxed or pensive? You see, because being from Ballymun, I'm behind enemy lines here, so I have to...
Yeah, you are. We always have a little bit of a cancel culture kind of thing going on with this. So I will ask you some questions about cancel culture. I'm sure you've got some experience. But before we get to that, let's start at the start. The Fomorians. The Fomorians and the Tuatha de Danann. Tell us a bit about them now and how it's they, whoever they are, that you're going to enlighten us, but how it's related to today.
Well, I'm a great believer, because of my own spiritual path, that everything is secular in nature, whether it be consciousness, whether it be cycles of the universe, whether it be cycles of nature, that everything operates in a secular roundabout way. It comes back again. And I'm a great believer in the concept that history always repeats itself. In some way, it won't be identically what history was in the past, but it will repeat itself in certain ways. Now, within Indo-European folklore, I mean, this is going to be kind of tricky, but about 5,500 years ago, these guys in South Central Asia developed the ability to digest lactic acid. You weren't expecting this one, were you? And they developed a gene that allowed them to digest lactic acid. And this created a group known as the Indo-Europeans. And it gave them a tremendous physical advantage over other tribal people within that part of the world. They were able to survive better in the winter because they could make milk and cheese as well as and things like that. And as a result, they spread south towards India and north into Europe. Now, they carried with them a certain level of archetypal folklore. Now, this archetypal folklore is repeated both in Hinduism and in Indo-European paganism. So for just about every European god or goddess, there's a Hindu equivalent. Different name, but the similar archetypes. There's a raven goddess, there's a god of thunder, there's Indra in the Hindu canon, and there's Thor over here, and this kind of thing. So that's our heritage on a very deep archetypal level. I know, but even if you dissolve in all the other heritage, the things we picked up over the centuries, Vikings, Normans, English, Anglo-Saxons, French, they still have that canon too. So it's ultimately, there were proto-Europeans living here before us, and they were the ones who built Newgrange and places like that, but we know nothing about them because basically they just bred into the Indo-Europeans, and that's what made the Irish. A commonality within that culture is the belief that there's a spiritual world, and everything that goes on in the spiritual world is also reflected in the physical world. Now, within Hinduism, you have the great epic of the Bhagavad Gita, which talks about a battle that happened in India 3,500 years ago at the field of Puruvashta. And it's one of the most amazing philosophical discussions between Prince Arjuna and Krishna. And basically, it begins with the despondency of Prince Arjuna. He looks around at the battlefield and says, "This is crazy. I'm killing all my friends. I'm killing everybody. What is this about?" And Krishna then tells him that, like, well, this is fate. This is the price you pay for being alive, for manifesting in this material world outside the spiritual nature. And what's going on here is going on in the spiritual world as well. And you have to face both of them. And he finishes that famous line of "Fight, Arjuna, fight," meaning that you have to live in the material world no matter what it throws at you. Now, you see this in Christianity and Judaism and Islam and other, the Abrahamic religions as well. But you've got, this is the deal. We're here, right? If we were still pagans to this day, we would still have a similar mentality to Hindus, in that we believe that what's going on in the physical world today is reflected by a battle in the spiritual world. And really, consciousness is a better way of putting it, at the consciousness level. Ireland is unique in the world, well, in Europe anyway, in that because of our isolation from mainland Europe, we have been a repository of this culture deeper than anyone. So, what they call Celtic folklore is really sort of like the final version of this culture, this pre-Christian culture, and so on. And so we retained it in our folklore, you know, and it remarkably so. You know, when you think about things like Shanachie singing and stuff like that, there's no other culture in Europe that has that. Maybe in Eastern Europe, but not in Western Europe. We are completely unique in that sense. And a lot of, you look at the Irish folklore, we'll talk about that now. So you have the notion that the Tuatha de Danann were a kind of a kingly, godlike race of kind of, you know, spiritual warriors, whatever, magicians, that came across the sea from the destroyed homelands. A common motif in a lot of European mythology. And they arrived here and they became basically involved in a battle with this group called the Fomorians, who were giants, and there's some tremendous theories about them, but I won't go into them. But they were basically a giant race that were not suited to the same kind of existence that the Tuatha de Danann had. And just like everywhere else in the world, a schism developed. And it resulted in two battles, the Battle of Moytura, and there was two of them. There was one in Cong, Neil area in County Waterford and County Mayo border, and there was another one down in West Sligo, down around Lough Arrow. Now, where Nuada, who was one of the heroes, was slain, and Lugh then slayed Balor of the Evil Eye, who was the boss man of the Fomorians. Now, in the 70s, some hippies in this country had I don't know their names, but they had some clever idea that this was actually the Irish version of the Bhagavad Gita, and the two battles actually represent the battle in the physical world and the battle in the material world. Mythologists would always say, why was there always two battles?
You mean the physical world and the spiritual world?
Yeah. So it was like an allegory, and that kind of was lost after a while, you know. So you had the first, and you get this in the Norse Eddas as well. You have the gods fighting on the battlefield at the very end, you know, the kind of a thing, along with the humans. And that kind of happens at the second battle of Moytura in Sligo, where you have Lugh and you have Nuada on the battlefield on the Morrigan with the humans. Okay, so this shows you that the gods and the humans are together in the same place. Now, eventually a group called the Milesian Gaels, this is the legend, this is folklore now, not history, it's pseudo history we're dealing with, but there's probably some truth to it, just like there's some truth to the Arthurian legends. They came here and they defeated the Tuatha de Danann, and they became the Gaelic people. They came here from Spain and Iberia, and funny enough, the genetic traces actually show that to be true. So there was a druid called Emergan, and he stood at Tara and he issued a proclamation that was called the Satire of the Wind. It was a poem that destroyed the Tuatha de Danann.
The I am the head of the...
I am a satirist of the wind. It's a phenomenal piece if you ever have to find it online and read it. Legend goes, long story short, the Tuatha de Danann went into the mounds, the barrows, the tumuli, the stone circles, the fairy forts, the rats, and they became the She, the fairy people. And they were going to stay there until Ireland was in its greatest need, okay? And then they would return to save Ireland. Now, being a weirdo, I had this idea that maybe that's a genetic memory that gets switched on in the secular sense, and that the Tuatha de Danann is almost like this osmosis of a genetic, cultural. Now, when I say genetic, I have to be very careful because I'm not trying to go into the world of, you know, eugenics or all that nonsense, which ironically the likes of Bill Gates and all those people love. But when I talk about that, I'm talking about a memory that's held deep within our ancestral spirit, to use Native American terms. I often find that interesting that Native Americans can use these terms and people go, that's very profound. And if an Irish person does it, goes, no, not like that, you know? And I find that very, very interesting. We've been coached out of that, you know? And we are a native people, end of story. I don't care what anyone says. We are a native people. It's as simple as that. And I'm not saying we're better than anyone or we have the unique ownership to this and nobody else should be allowed here. I'm saying that we have just as right. After all that's been done to us in our history, we are basically no different than the Navajo or the Lakota living on the reservation. And if it's gone forever. And I'm not talking about being bred out or anything like that. I'm talking about we are a living repository of at least 10 to 12,000 years of human history. And that's worth saving. I'm sorry, that's worth saving. I wouldn't take that away from another group. I wouldn't take it away from you know, Indians or Malaysians or Africans or anyone. It's part of the human story, and it belongs just with any other. And I really do feel in recent months that there has been an upswell of consciousness in this country. I'm not talking politics. I absolutely despise politics, okay? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the folk spirit of the people of this island. Something is happening. And that's my theory, that this could be those ancient, this could be on an allegorical level. I'm not trying to sound like airy-fairy about it, because as Joseph Campbell tells us, myth is the most powerful truth of all, because it targets the soul, it targets the direct nature of human experiences, and this is why we have this phenomenal canon of myth. And I don't want to sound narcissistic about it, that, oh, looky me, I was born in this generation where it happened. But I'm sure many of you in this room can feel that there's something like that happening now. There's all kinds of people here, there's all kinds of people following my work. God loved them, even though I give them a hard time, plenty of Christians. But we're still here because we know there's a bigger picture than dogma. And it's driven by the subconscious level of the folk spirit of the people, and something is coming up. Now, this language is terribly loaded at times. You have to be careful, because unfortunately there was a little Austrian fellow with a moustache 80 or 90 years ago who played on this horribly within Central Europe. And so, but that was a very different thing. That was sort of to re-weaponize Prussian military stuff. We're not doing it for that reason. We're just doing it for the same reason that we want, a way I would see it is, I want our school children in 100 years to hate Peg. That's the way I'd put it.
That's the answer to everything. If they hate Peg, we're free of tyranny.
Yeah, we get that. We're home. We're home and dry. Yeah.
You mentioned the little man with the moustache. Not to go into that too much, but I do remember a story that when he died, allegedly, he was found with a weapon or a stone that was there, and some people would say that that stone was tested and went back to Leitrim. Are you aware of that?
Back to where?
Leitrim. It was found in, I forget the name of the mountain. But
Iron Mountain in Leitrim.
Iron Mountain, well done.
Oh, it's a very peculiar story, that.
And well,
yeah.
What I heard was then it was, the story was that it was Lou's spear as part of it. It was one of these powerful weapons. It was one of these ancient weapons, because he was into that. So anyway, but I suppose the question is magic. They were using magic, is that right? Yeah, so is that like, how? Is it magic to control? Is it like the Fomorians use, I mean the Tuatha de Danann use magic as well?
The Christians put your hands over your ears right now, but Aleister Crowley, 666 himself, gave the best description of magic. It's the art and science of creating change in the material world in order to achieve your will. So what you want, you achieve your will by that way. What's black magic? I'm going to explain what black magic is to you. Black magic is simply when someone else or some other entity forces their will upon you and uses their own art and science to change the material world. Practical example. The footage of trucks in Milan in March 2020. People falling down in fuzzy videos in China. Lots of, ooh, it's not good. It's pretty bad. And then people that you know around you suddenly changing personalities. Changing personalities. Someone you thought was quite strong, you know, not given to hype and hysteria, running around with a mouth and an eyeball the side of their head. And the only proof they have for it is RTE, BBC and CNN. Now remember, you can sit there and go, oh, science says this and science says that. But page 2 of Google said different things that came from places like the Mayo Clinic and so on. So there's an element of, it's the whole thing of like, the Satanists say something like, well, if you walk over, if the devil or the vampire brings you over the threshold, that's your free will. You did that by yourself. You didn't do that. No one dragged you over the threshold. You were invited in, then you're fair game. But they beckon you in. And they beckoned the whole world in spring 2020. They beckoned us all in.
Not all of us.
Yeah.
Thomas, sorry to cut you off, but you said something about RT. Are you trying to say that RT is not always telling the truth? because I'm offended on behalf of Ryan Tuberty and my buddies there.
I wrote a book back in 2012, you can read it for free on my Substack, called The Anvil of the Psyche, and I described, because I used to be a corporate communications consultant for Goldman Sachs, and so I know a bit about how this game works. I went in there as a graphic designer, and all these sort of idiots who are great at finance and money couldn't read and write the English language, so they used to get me. I was the Irish fella downstairs who knew how to write and talk and what words like provisional meant, you know. And not in that context. And so I ended up being, going around with these serial killers in suits. But I learned an awful lot about how the world really works and how financial documents could be written in such a way that someone is having their arse taken off them and they think they're winning the lotto. And then me putting this thing out there, me giving presentations, and I'm going, these guys are going to kill me. I'm the paddy they're sacrificing, human sacrifice. And they all come in and go, "God, Thomas, that was great, thank you very much." Because the spiel spellbound them. They were spellbound. And that's what happens on the evening news. Here's how it works. You switch on the evening news, the music comes on. Dun, 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 boom, 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 boom. Fuck, pardon me. Next thing, you're screwed. Here's another fella telling you why you're screwed. And this woman's going to come in and tell you why you're screwed with something else. And you're screwed, and you're screwed, and you're screwed, and you're screwed, and you're screwed. Now the football, now the sport. Adrenaline goes down, right? And then they finish up with a story of, today in Cavan, a 99-year-old woman baked a cake and it was wonderful. Wasn't that lovely? Endorphins rises up. So what happens is, you get, in the old days before 24-hour news, the 1 o'clock fix of adrenaline, the 6 o'clock fix of adrenaline, the 9 o'clock fix of adrenaline. And we all know people who are addicted to the evening news, don't we? And then you have ones that are mainlining on 24-hour channels, news channels. Yeah, I was living in New York. When you hear this one, when the Gulf War I broke out. Oh, this was funny. And this woman was telling me that everyone in our street all vanished as soon as the war started and didn't come out again until it was over. And they were literally watching CNN 24 hours a day in a state of extreme hypertension. Well, that's black magic, because they're making you believe something against your will. You should be out doing things, feeding the ducks in the park, not worrying about a missile launch in the Middle East. But that's because you've been taken away from what you should do, your dharma, and this is what they want. They don't want us following our path, following our bliss, as Joseph Campbell, our dharma. And there's everything thrown at your face from the time you're a baby to throw you off the path of your dharma, your purpose in life. And that's because Western civilization and the pathological condition it is now couldn't exist without that. We have to all be basically controlled.
Why? Why would anybody consciously want people not to follow their bliss, follow their dharma? I mean, is it?
Why the average person would want to do it? Because they don't know any better. We've all been caught up in things.
No, I get that. I can see how we can get caught up, but would there be someone out there who's consciously going, "Oh, I'm going to trick humanity into, not following their dharma"?
See, that's a loaded question. Though.
It is a loaded question.
Yeah, I mean, another aspect of my life is I actually do believe in conspiracy theory, and I have done before it was ever trendy. I mean, when I was in New York, we used to sit around and talk about the Warren Commission and JFK. We were all educated, interesting people. It was like historical what if, It wasn't anything. It only kind of domain of weirdos when the X-Files came along. There was a purpose to remember the lone gunmen, the three guys in the show that lived in the caravan. That was only weirdos were interested in this stuff. But I mean, I was quite, we used to sit down and have in-depth discussions about the JFK assassination, and that was normal. It was only since 2000, the early 2000s, that it became this kind of taboo subject. But at the same time too, I get a lot of crap off other people because of conspiracy theorists because I'm very conservative when it comes to this stuff. You know, I do know that a huge factor is human greed. That's a huge factor in it. And a huge factor is selfishness, and a huge factor is control. But that doesn't account for everything. There's something else going on. I was something else beyond it. You hear all these stories about there's a kind of an overlord, an Illuminati and all this stuff. This is all very childish, this stuff. To actually use that kind of language, I mean. It's quite childish because it just gives you a kind of a role-playing character in a game where they're the bad guys, you're the good guys, and we're going to take them down. That's not really how it works. These people are much more clever than you could even imagine.
And it's a victim perpetrator as well, isn't it? They're harming us and we're weak.
I had a clue actually happen in my own life. I'm not going to name the bank in New York I was working for because I signed the non-disclosure agreement with them. And so, but it was one of the biggies on Wall Street. And there used to be a special elevator for the big shots. The fellows who went to the Ivy League schools like Harvard and Yale and Cornell and all those kind of places. And I worked with a lot of those guys, and they were great people. But there was a certain upper echelon that no one really knew who they were. And they used to get on their own elevator and go up to the top floor. And I used to ask people about them, and they used to say things like, jokingly, like the people I worked with who are bankers and stuff like that would jokingly say, oh, they're the devil worshippers. Things like, as a joke, but they didn't really mean it, they just said it as a joke. Or things like that, you know, he says, they're the biggest mafia of all. But they weren't joking about that. Because one day, people think that everyone in Wall Street is an asshole, but they're not. There's some lovely people that work there just trying to look after their families and stuff like that. But one day the elevator in this building was broken, and the main elevator up to the floor I worked on. And so they had the guy in the little suit and cap guiding us through those little rope barriers to the posh guys, the special elevator, you know. And I was in there with 3 guys, and normally you would have a little chit chat about, you know, the baseball or something like a TV show, a movie that was on that night. Well, I was standing beside 3 people, and the energetic level of them was terrifying. Like, it almost felt like, I could imagine if you were kidnapped by an organized crime gang and you're sitting in a room tied up wondering what's going to happen. It felt like that. So I think there is some kind of super echelon of particular individuals who are selected for whatever reason. Maybe they were brilliant minds, maybe they were right families. I don't know. But who are they? I haven't got a clue. But there has to be some kind of, I don't buy this whole thing where people, I think as people have said, there can't possibly be any great conspiracy because they get nothing right. And my attitude to that is, things are wrong because they're meant to be that way, not because the ones running the show are not doing it properly. You know, it's like the people who say the system is broken and needs to be fixed. No, it's not broken. It's exactly as well. It's running exactly as how they wanted to run. This is a great naive thing that, like, particularly getting leftist circles, that we can smash the system and start over again. The system is evil. The system is broken. No, the system is doing what it's supposed to do. And you know, if you didn't learn that between 2020 and 2022, you never will. That they thrive on chaos. They thrive on anxiety. They thrive on robbing us from sitting down and thinking who am I really and what do I want from life? Because they make living incredibly difficult, even if you move up the economic scale. Ironically, they make it harder. You know, like I grew up in the Ballymun flats, and they were like council flats, and they were very cheap rent, and suppose you're a fella there on the dole, everything's paid for. So you really don't have to worry about anything other than like maybe crime and stuff like that. But suppose you want to get out of there and you say, I'd like to buy a house in a nice neighborhood. Well, suddenly you have a whole layer of problems that you didn't have before then. And then maybe you want to go up higher again. I'd like to be the manager of the company and I'd like a bigger house and start my own company. And then a whole new layer of other problems come in again. That can't be by accident. That's almost like an inverted social Darwinism that is put there to deliberately make life as difficult as possible the more you're devoted to the game. Isn't that true? Isn't that true? Those of you who said, I got your education, I mean, you know, went to college and so on, got the mortgage and tried to do the right thing, be a good citizen. Didn't it actually get harder? Didn't the stress get worse? Yeah. I'm telling you, that can't be an accident.
You were talking about banking. I used to be a banker too. I worked in Tokyo for Bear Stearns, who were the 5th largest investment bank at the time, but they collapsed. But I noticed you were saying that about the different. I met lovely people there. Some of my friends are there, but I did notice, as a general rule, it was very in the head, and there was no heart or spirit. It was kind of like it was godless or something. There was a godlessness.
Where did you work?
Derivatives in Tokyo.
Where's the office?
I don't. It was near Ichibu, Roppongi Ichome in Tokyo.
I mean, the banks in New York were very interesting because there's a strong working class element in those places, and the trading floors and stuff like that. So I didn't have that experience, to be honest with you. Not in New York. There's a lot of those people will be like sons and daughters of Italian Americans or Irish Americans who just came from working class backgrounds and worked themselves up. So there, I found there was actually very refreshing, but it depends where you are, I guess.
You were a pagan, right? And you grew up in the 80s. You obviously weren't born a pagan, or maybe you were. When did that start? Like, I'm guessing you were a Catholic or something, the same as the rest of us. And how did that change?
Well, my parents didn't force religion on me, so I was kind of lucky that way. You know, they just, I mean, I don't ever even remember saying, get down to the priest or anything like that. I don't think I ever had that. But I was baptized and I had the first Holy Communion and confirmation and all that. So I didn't have that religious family. So that wasn't part of me. If I told you how I became a pagan, you wouldn't believe me. It was a movie called The Song of Bernadette about the Virgin Mary. And my parents were out one night, and I was about 8. And they were with their friends down the road. And the film came on. It was about Saint Bernadette. And it tells the story of Saint Bernadette down in Lourdes, you know. And it's a Hollywood film, and then halfway through the film, the Virgin Mary appears. And to this day, I've never been more frightened in my life.
How can you be afraid of the Virgin Mary?
I used to pray that she wouldn't appear to me.
Who did you pray to?
I'm not kidding. When people I review horror films and stuff for a living, and they ask me what's the most frightening film you've ever seen, The Song of Bernadette. Now, to compound that, about 20 years ago, I'm sitting in my parents' kitchen, and it comes on, and I say to my outfit, "Oh, that film scared the shit out of me when I was a kid." And he goes, "What? Come on." I says, "Wait for the final scene at the end where Bernadette is dying of cancer, and the Virgin Mary appears in the corner of the room." And he's looking at it like this. And he goes, "Oh, good Jesus." he said, "You're absolutely right." So I got frightened away by hardcore Catholicism. But funny enough, I kind of like it a lot now because it doesn't have a hold on me. So I like basilicas and holy wells, and I like going into lovely old churches and stuff. I'll tell you when it really happened. When I was 10 years old, it's an even funnier story. They took us up to Newgrange I was in the Holy Spirit School in Ballymun. They took us up to Newgrange in Tara, and I was like, 10-year-olds. I was in Rivendell. I was in Lord of the Rings. I was like, right, and grass, and a sheep, a big stone, that kind of thing. And you can go inside that, and there's all fucking artwork all over, this kind of thing. And then when you hear this one, so I came out of that all sort of like buzzing, 10, 11 years old. I think it was 10. This is my future. This is where I belong, right? I want to know about all these things. Okay, it's that kind of thing where you ask out the girl that you had a huge crush on, right? And it's gone great, it's gone brilliant, right? And at the end of the night you say, "So next Saturday night?" And she goes, "No, I'm not really interested." It was like that, right? That kind of. They took us to see Oliver Plunkett's head in the cathedral in Drogheda. So I saw a decapitated head in a box, right? And I just had this awful feeling of not feeling well, inside me, So the next day in school, the teacher's saying, "Well, you all have to write essays now about what you did yesterday." And St. Oliver Plunkett, he was like, no offense to people from Kerry, but the way I would describe this guy was, if if John Carpenter made a film about Kerryman, right? And he was like, oh, Oliver Plunk is a great man. He died for the church. He was a great Irish hero and all this stuff. You know, I can't do the Kerry accent. And I kept saying, and you know, you saw his head in the box. They chopped his head off. No, this is a weird thing to be telling 9-year-olds. You know, they chopped his head off, and his head is in there, and it didn't decay. It looks like it's been made from like plasticine. It didn't decay. You know, it looks like a turnip. But anyway. Don't they say that like your quantum vision is different in everyone else's head? But anyway, I said quite innocently, can we talk about that place, Newgrange? What was that about? And he just goes, oh, that's nothing. That's just a place where they worship the dead. Now the irony of that, even at 10 years old, sunk in. So then it was a great interest in and this is another thing, I think they deliberately push us away from that, because I remember in school, when I was going to school, all the Irish mythology was taught through the Irish language. So if you had difficulty with the Irish language, you didn't learn the mythology that well. You know, so it was like, so it was a matter of going down the library, occasionally or two you would have a thing on, you know, the Fomorians or the Cuchulainn, the Nathena, Finn McCool, and it was just like, that was really did it. But I didn't associate that with any kind of spiritual thing. To me that was stories, you know. I didn't associate that with, but I didn't really know what paganism was. I thought it was like, you know, Wiccans and things like that, you know. And it didn't, or it was people who sacrificed the dead, sacrificed people to burning wicker men. I didn't really know what it was properly, you know. And then, like, I started to meet people, and they talked about, you know, those stories are actually, to our culture, what the biblical stories are to the Abrahamic religions. So as you think in terms of, like, when you look at the biblical stories, a lot of them, like King David slaying Goliath, is that really any different than Lugh killing Balor? And it's not. And then, you know, then I started to understand, oh, now I see their lessons in life. And so that's their lessons in life, and these mythologies are a vehicle to make you understand that reality is not a cold, hard, materialistic thing. Now, I never got that from Christianity. Now, I'm not, you know, I'm quite fascinated by Abrahamic religions. Even Judaism fascinates me, and Islam even fascinates me a lot. But I don't get that from them. But I'll give you an example. I can remember in the Blackstairs Mountains, the first real spiritual experience I ever had in my life was watching the sunset over that, you know? And it was, I was about 14, and I was actually had tears in my eyes. And then my friends beat me up. But it was like, it was...
And rightfully so. Expressing emotion publicly as a male.
Well, yeah, but I was a martyr.
Yeah, time for the cause.
But and then I realised, okay, this country, there's something about this country. It's not just a bunch of rocks and grass and a bit of sea around it. There's a feeling. There's a feeling here. There's something. And so it developed from that, and then I discovered like things later on. But that's how it happened. I was never a member of any particular. I took a great interest in Nordic paganism, things like that, that stuff. And I discovered that, like, you know, it was always kind of something when people say to me, "What do you believe in?" And they say, "Well, I think I'm a pagan." I'd say, "I think I'm a pagan." What, you worship a bunch of rocks? And I go, "Well, have you ever heard about animism?" That's kind of true, you know. And then I explained to them, I said, that's terribly interesting. But I have to say, in terms of being it solidified in my life, the American writer, the Irish-American writer, we should be very proud of him here, because he's one of our own diaspora. Joseph Campbell wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And he showed that all these stories all over the world all represent a commonality of archetypes and forms. And there's the hero who... He developed this process called the hero's journey, where you start out in life. The hero starts out on an adventure, and there's a call to adventure. Something calls the hero to adventure. Along the way, has to slay a dragon, has to encounter a wizard who helps them, meets a temptress, We know what that's like. And our fellas know what that's like. And you meet a woman who's right for you, a loving kind of female archetype, and then you develop, you die somehow and you're resurrected. So like Orpheus, this kind of thing, there's a very common theme that the hero dies and is resurrected through magic. And that's Christianity really, isn't it? That has a lot of that too as well. Isn't it? And that was like, oh my God, now I feel really a part of it. Because when you take that kind of template that Joseph Campbell put out there and you apply it to your own life and go, in allegorical form now, yeah, I did go on a call to adventure. I bought a one-way ticket to New York when I was 19 and worked in washing dishes, and I did battle a dragon. I did meet the temptress. I did meet the wizard. The wizard was the one who might guide me and say, no, you should really try a hand at this. And there was you entered into the school, you entered into and you have the battles, and you come out the other side. And when you see your life in those terms, in those kind of monomythic terms, well, I can guarantee you, folks, it makes the meaning of your own life, no matter how many divorces or painful experiences or losses you had, it brings a hell of a lot of comfort to you, because you're not depending on an external savior to save yourself. You're your own hero. You're your own resolver of your own story.
A lot of pressure though, isn't it? Someone else will do it.
Yeah, but you see, that's part of it as well, and that even appears in Christianity. What did Lucifer, well, it wasn't Lucifer because he didn't exist then, but what did the Satan say to Jesus? If you stop being the Son of God, he showed them Israel and he said, this will be yours. But it wasn't Satan's.
It wasn't enough.
Yeah, but it wasn't Satan's to give. He didn't create it. So, and that was the temptation. So that appears in so many things.
But could he have given it? How did he offer it?
You took him up to the top of a mountain and showed him and says, this could be yours.
Oh, I thought it was Satan's. That's why he offered it. I thought the world belonged to Satan and beyond the world belonged to God.
Maybe, I don't know.
I wasn't there, but you mentioned the characters, the mythology, the heroes, and you said that maybe it was hidden from us on purpose. That they didn't share all of this information was on purpose. And it reminded me, just the other day I was in the Porrick Pierce Museum, and Porrick Pierce was a teacher, and he did teach his students about Cuchulainn and Lugh and the heroes. And I believe he said something like, if the Irish people knew their own heroes, Ireland would be free. And of course we know what happened then. Of course there was the fighting and the will to be free. So maybe it's related to that.
Well, they generate compensation. So they take away Cuchulainn, Finn McCool and Nuada, and they give you English soccer players. And kids grow up thinking some English soccer player who plays for an English Premiership club is his salvation. And this is why you have this tremendously tragic and unique case of Irish people watching British soccer on the television and going, us, we, them.
So who do you support?
Bohemians. I picked up I was working with a fella, and I picked up an AA atlas of the British Isles, and he was going, oh, so sweet them, and he was, I don't know what team in England it was. And I said, throw a fucking dart at the map and just pick where you're from, because you're not from here, as a joke. Why do you call that, why do you think that's we, us, them? Because they want you disconnected from who you really are. It's as simple as that, and this country is this republic is a funny old place, when I was growing up, there was always this notion that the Irish were useless. I don't know if you agree with that, but I did. Our sports teams were useless, our army was useless, our movies and television shows were useless, and they weren't. Have you ever been to Estonia and watched their television? Have you ever seen Italian TV? And whatever. And I want to know where that came from. And that was compounded by the troubles in the north. And this whole thing, we're Irish, what are we like? What are we like? And it wasn't until I went away and travelled the world and I realised, what are we like? We're amazing. There's no one like us. We've had the most For instance, we don't have a national story that fully addresses the absolute aberrations of horrors that our ancestors were exposed to. You know, the famine when I was growing up was like the spuds ran out. But it wasn't, the human story just wasn't there, unless you lived in rural Ireland and you had a grandparent who said, oh, my great-grandmother lived, but the rest of us, it was just something like that. And unfortunately, because the Catholic Church wanted to build parishes in America and other places, our people were sent abroad. And they all became, like Irish Americans became Catholic Americans. They lost the connection to the homeland, because that's what the plan was. I'm convinced of it. And they had the American story to live. And I want to know why we were never allowed to be proud. And it was almost like, you know, the whole story of when you bottle a lie up inside you and then you confess, you feel amazing. Well, I can remember the 1990 World Cup, Irish people became normal finally. They were not ashamed of who they didn't have this shame inside them. And I know it's sport and it just doesn't mean anything, but it was enough, the catalyst was enough just in that to make us feel better about ourselves. And what you know, the next thing, the economy starts booming. In the 1990s was the real Celtic tiger. If you look at everything, the country was going like that, and we weren't doing it on cheap credit. Everything, industry, exports, the lot was flying. We were like really where. And then, this is before the euro now. And that directly came out of a result that we're not losers anymore. Now, I want to know why we were made feel that way. I want to know, I'm angry about it actually. People have written about it, but not discussed it enough. And I think it was deliberate. I think there was elements in this country that didn't want us to feel good about being Irish. Why? I don't know. But that's an impression I get from my growing up.
Well, I feel like, I don't know if this is related or not, but I feel like there's kind of Ireland right now is like a petri dish for the globalists. You know, that's like everything in the world is just being forced on the Irish now.
Yeah, but if you go to other countries, even places like Sri Lanka, they'll tell you the same thing.
Oh yeah, maybe.
Yeah, Swedes will tell you that. People in Luxembourg will tell you that. People in many Caribbean countries will tell you that. We have to understand that the human race is under attack everywhere, literally, by this pathological force called globalization. And basically, it's a bunch of crazy people that, I'll give you an example. Do you remember when, I'd only ever seen that video of when Hillary Clinton was told Gaddafi was murdered, killed. And she, on live American television, she goes, we saw, he died with a gleeful look on the face. If that was you'd be sectioned. You understand? You'd be sectioned. If someone did that next to you, would you want to go to a restaurant with them ever again? You wouldn't. It's horrible. And it's like, I remember watching that and my jaw hitting the ground and saying, this woman is this is Nurse Ratched on speed. And the fact that she has the Clinton Foundation makes it more terrifying. Then they come over to this country and they're worshipped like gods.
And she's a Crowley fan, isn't she?
No, that was Barbara Bush. That's a true story. That's actually true. That Barbara Bush's father, and she looks just like him, and all the dates all lined up, is Aleister Crowley. She was an American socialite who was into a kind of a drug and sex scene in Paris, and there was the great B666 at one of these parties. She's identical. She looks just like him, and it's like the Castro and Trudeau thing. It's like it's like one of those things that you say, come on, it can't be. But then you start looking at dates, and you say, well, maybe it is.
Come here. Have you been cancelled? And if so, by whom? Or have people tried to cancel you? And why would someone? You seem very affable and agreeable to me, Thomas. Why would someone try to cancel a man as good as yourself?
I don't think I have actually been cancelled.
And that makes sense.
I'm trying to think. I don't think I have. Yeah, but we still beat that. Yeah, Collinstown. That was kind of a semi-cancelling thing. But there was all kinds of plan B for that. which you should have. And that wasn't a cancelling as much as I think they just got fed up listening to some person complaining. It was more a case of that. And that, but it wasn't like, I never had a you see, I'm kind of like, I'm kind of protected because, and this is for the rest of you, okay? And no disrespect for you, that those of you who are running for election and stuff like that, they don't really care about you until you start going into their field, into their game. And then the knives come out. I've seen it over and over again. You know, they don't like people, or they'll tolerate you to a point, and then if you step into their arena, although this is a very good time probably in Ireland's history right now to do that, for outsiders to jump into the game. But in general, if you try to form a political party or run for office, that's when they come after you, because that's when you really see it's a closed shop, and they don't like outsiders coming in because they want to keep those jobs for these hereditary families that exist within these mainstream political parties, where, you know, basically the current crop of politicians are the grandchildren of previous, you know, that kind of a thing. The establishment here wants a closed shop. And also with that, I'm just too weird for them. They can't get a bead on me. And that's, you know, they can't pin me down in any way, you know, that kind of a thing. And, you know, so obviously someone who can sit there about, you know, and talk about Jewish mysticism and in a kind of an almost like enamored way, obviously you can't call them an anti-Semite. You can't call someone, you know, you can't call someone who just wrote the foreword on a book for a black lady a racist, you know, and co-written books with people with other races and stuff. They can't put a bead on me because I think I'm just too odd. I'm just too strange. It's that I'm like your man in MASH that wore the dress. Remember him? Yeah. It's that kind.
I think you look very well in a dress, Thomas. Thomasina.
Yeah, a nice floral pattern.
Okay, well that's good. I'll just be a bit weirder then. That'll stop the people trying to.
You see, that also protects me because that means I'm comfortable with, you know, with a gender transitioning, even in a theoretical sense.
Theoretically, you're a beautiful.
Theoretical sense, yeah.
Thomas. Simon Harris, I know you don't like politics, but Simon Harris and Helen McEntee, I believe, and a few of those likes of people are creating the hate crime legislation. What do you think of that? And if it became into Ireland, if it entered its clause into Ireland, what would that mean to the people of Ireland?
Yeah, it's an abomination, and it's completely in violation of Western ideals. The West from the time. Now remember, who created the West? Pagans, classical Greece and Rome, and you know Aristotle wasn't, you know, Church of Ireland, and Plato wasn't, you know, a Jesuit. These are pagans. So you owe your pagans, you owe the pagans of Europe a tremendous debt for giving you this Western civilization, and it's an abomination. I would put it on par with, like, you know, King James prohibition against witches in England in the 1600s. It's that hysterical, it's that beastly, it's that craven, and we must fight it with every fibre of our being.
How?
Well, I'm a great believer that, you see, we live in an age where human decency takes second place to protocol, okay? So people say, oh, well, no, I don't know the full thing about what's his name, Enoch Burke, but that guy is rotting away in prison. And there's, you know, I know gangsters on the north side of Dublin who've never spent a day in prison and who've done the most horrific things. And this guy is rotting away in prison, and when you talk to the average person about it, they'd go, well, but he didn't do this, he didn't do that. And I just say, you look, he probably hates me because I'm a pagan, right? Because the guy's a very devout Christian. But where's your humanity? You know, do you feel that the guy must be locked up for that? Rot away in Mountjoy prison. Do you feel that's right? And that's the problem we have today, that they condition people that, I will, even though he's a Christian, and there's every chance that 400 years ago he would have burned me at the stake. theoretically, I would still defend his right to have his freedom of expression. Okay? And then if you don't like it, you say you don't like it. Now, of course, there is offensive language, calling people malicious names or ethnic slurs in a malicious sense, you know, to cause pain and hurt. But the laws already deal with that. Those laws are already in situ. And honest to God, I've been all over the world and I've done every kind of job. And I've only ever met one person in my life that was a racist. Now, when I say racist, I mean a hatred for another race. I'm not talking about, you know, someone may have a different religion or culture, and I say, I don't particularly like the way they do this, you know. But nowadays we live in a situation where you say, you know, I don't like chicken korma. Oh, so you hate Asians. You know, the bar's been lowered, you know, God, and it's awful. It's created this tension, this awful tension. I'm glad I don't work in the corporate world now. I could only imagine it's probably like walking on eggshells for many people. But, you know, do you remember that band Two Live Crew? They were a rap band. And they had an album that had all offensive languages on it. This was the album that led to the sticker, you know, parental guidance stickers on American albums. It was Tipper Gore, ironically, was the American Housewives Legion of Decency or something. And he put stickers on albums like they rated them like movies. And the American comedian came out, Eric Bogosian, actor comedian, and he read out on stage at the MTV Awards the Bill of Rights, the American Bill of Rights. And he says, and he made the point, it doesn't matter if this language offends you. It doesn't matter. It's only language, and it's your right to be offended. Like being offended is objective, right? You know, you might find my scarf offensive. You know, I might find the way you eat a slice of pizza offensive. But it's not a condition of human existence in terms of actually accept. You know, it has to be done. It's something I can refuse or not. It's something I can. You know, I totally support people who wanted to wear dresses and go around and so on like that. Consenting adults can do anything they want with their wiggly bits. That's none of my business, absolutely none of my business. I said consenting adults, that's a very important part of all that. But you can't have laws regulating speech to that degree. You just can't. We wouldn't have Brendan Behan, James Joyce. We wouldn't have the Dubliners. We wouldn't have the Wolf Tones. We wouldn't have lots of things if those laws had been around back then. You know, could you imagine Boyzone albums back in the 1920s? And that's all that's available, you know. So this is a major problem. This is a very deep thing, and I'm an anarchist in the sense that I don't believe. I mean, I do believe that there should be a government to protect the people and run the justice system, but there shouldn't be any philosophical drive behind the government. It shouldn't be left wing or right wing. It just should purely be an administrative function that makes sure the country runs and is safe. But when you have a philosophical mandate, you get into extremely dangerous territory, because that philosophy then regulates language. And once you start regulating language, you're on a really dangerous path then. You really are. And I would ask people here tonight, even if you don't like me or don't believe in anything I'm saying, just remember that you're here tonight. The only reason you're in this room is because of an enduring legacy of Western freedom of speech, right? Make sure you can still come into this room and other people's rooms. And if you don't like what they say, and if you don't like what they sing, write in their novels, well, you just walk away from it. And if they do things that are malicious, the laws already exist to prosecute them. Now, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. So we don't need these hate speech laws. It's as simple as that. Now, regarding these politicians, why they're doing it, I'm not going to get into any kind of hateful language here, because I don't know these people personally, but as human beings, you know, I don't like to do that. I don't like to go down that road. But it seems to me I'll give you an example. The other day I watched on YouTube an interview with Charles Haughey from the 1980s. And you compare him to what we have in politics today, regardless of all the things he got up to, he was a colossus. He had charisma, he had intellect, he could speak, and we all know he had a funny, he had his own sort of, who we say, experimental private life, but it was, people back then had better, they just left people alone. They were more, you mind your own business, and that was what it was. I don't see people like that in politics today. I see people who are just not fit for the job. They don't seem, the current things that are going on right now seem to be all chaos. Every law seems to cause a problem that a new law has to fix. And that shows me that there's no one's willing to take the blame and stand up or to make a decision. There's a kind of a pathology of mediocrity. That's the way I would put it.
There's a lot of celebrities lately becoming Catholic, I've noticed, including Russell Brand, and that's the first half of the question, even though it's not a question. But I remember, like, the Catholic Church, the Christianity has been attacked a lot over the last few years. And Steve Hughes, our mutual friend, the comedian, he said once, if you take Christ out, that's what we have, and if you take it out, then what? What do you replace it with?
As technology increases, we're moving greatly towards this transhumanist thing. Automation, everything else, AI. And there's a general sense, at least on the subconscious level, that we're losing our souls. We're losing our sense of humanity. Now, it's a psychic kind of event. The actual word psyche is the Greek word for soul. And pagans again. And I think the rush towards Catholicism is a very interesting one. I'm not hostile to Catholicism at all. I think if I was, I've said to people, like, I'm a pagan, but if I wasn't a pagan, I'd probably be either a Hindu or a Catholic. I'd be a folk Catholic. I wouldn't abide by the Vatican or any of that stuff. And the church has behaved appallingly during the lockdowns and stuff like that, and the clergy. But I get it. I totally get it. And a big reason to this is the Presbyterian churches seem to have a crisis of their own they're dealing with. You have in England, like the Anglican Church, and even in the Baptist Church, not Baptist Church, but like the Episcopal churches in America. I've been following this quite deeply, actually. And these people feel very disconnected from the clergy and the bishops, who seem much more interested in appropriating the churches for wokeness, to use that crude term. I don't really, but it's the only one I can really think of. And sort of like progressive politics has entered the pulpit of many Presbyterian liberal churches. You don't get it so much in things like Calvinism or Lutheranism, but you would definitely get it Church of England, Church of Ireland, Anglican, this kind of thing, even Methodists, amazingly. But it seems to be, it has alienated a lot of those Christians in those churches from their own faith. And they've been converting over to Catholicism for a good while now. That's been happening. That's been going on. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's one to watch, definitely. And I think it has a tremendous story behind it, but I'm not sure yet, Aidan, what that is. But I suspect it has something to do with transhumanism, automation, AI, the disconnection from reality, the over-dependence on social media. There's a sense, remember, churches also create bonding and community, we forget that sometimes. They create a great sense of togetherness for people. They provide comfort, not necessarily from the priest, but when somebody has a loss, there may be people in the parish who can take care of them. And I think it's a very positive thing, even though I wish they were pagans instead. I have to say I say, okay, I understand, I get it. I think.
It's important to support the venues that support us, and it is, a lot of events like this do get cancelled because people are afraid to talk or ask questions or just listen to common sense nowadays. But luckily, I think that fear is passing.
Yeah, I think that's something I noticed too, that there's definitely a cancelification thing going on. It's that sort of virus seems to be passing. It's
happened to me twice this week, actually, two different venues. Both just said, this thing happened, but don't worry, we're just going to ignore it.
That's good news.
Yeah, and I think the ignoring is good, because sometimes, and I have a desire, I can be a bit fiery, I sometimes try to react, and I notice, oh, that just made things way worse.
but you know, it's a double-edged sword, because if we're no longer being cancelled, we're kind of lame then.
We're boring.
We've lost our edge.
We are.
So, like, there's a dilemma there now.
Well, there's a pandemic of mediocrity going around, and I think we caught it. So we were talking there earlier. This hat, by the way, will be mainly about your questions. If you have a question to ask Thomas, I will repeat the question from the microphone so it can be picked up afterwards. But I've just one or two to ask, if I may, to finish off. And we were talking about Christianity, Catholicism, and with Catholicism, you know, getting hammered in Ireland over the last number of years, it's left a void. And I suppose the question is, do you think that void has been filled with like a new religion, wokeism, which seemed to come from nowhere?
Yeah, 100%. And I think there was an intermediary stage before that. It was Celtic tigerism, materialism. But there was lots of things about the Catholic Church in this country that had to be destroyed. You know, so let's not get all nostalgic that it was all, you know, sugar plum pie lollipops. There was a lot of bleakness as well. There was a lot of things that happened that should not have happened, and there was a lot of goodness. It was a full breakfast, you know. But yes, the assault on Catholicism to me was like, you know, I had mixed feelings about it. I had a boss once who told me that when I left the job, he didn't want me to leave, and he says, but I told him what the job I got, and he says, that's a fantastic opportunity. And he said, it's like watching my mother-in-law driving my Ferrari over a cliff. But it's a bit like that, isn't it, you know? I tell you what was a pivotal moment in all this for me. I honestly, when the Catholic Church thing was being hammered, I was like, well, I don't really care. I wasn't that malicious about it. I was like, I don't care, you know. But then something happened. Now, I'm pro-choice, absolutely 100%, you know, and always have been. And I do believe that option should be there because of sometimes it's needed, okay? But that doesn't make me a fanboy. It's an unnecessary and it's an unfortunate necessity of the life. I hate to say that, but sometimes it's definitely women get cancer and stuff when they're pregnant and all kinds of other things, incest and all sort of other things. But I'm not saying that's an excuse why, but I think it shouldn't be completely. And actually, under our law, it was kind of vague before they passed that amendment. It kind of was illegal in a funny kind of way, and legal at the same time. But they just wanted. I'll tell you what happened. I followed the whole debate, and then they had this, what I could only call one of the most sordid things I've ever seen in my life took place in Dublin Castle. And people screaming and dancing and shouting when it was legalised. And they said, you can now have abortions. Now, to me, you know, I'm not a woman. I could imagine going to have that procedure would be a very difficult thing. Would be quite an intense experience. And it's not something you throw a party over. That's the way I see it. And that party was almost like the sacrifice, the final sacrifice of Irish Catholicism in a kind of a burlesquing humiliation. It's made me feel incredibly uncomfortable to see people screaming, yeah, we can have it. It just didn't seem right to me. It seemed, most of all, it seemed infantile and childlike. Yeah, we're not backward paddies anymore, we can have that kind of, it just seemed infantile and child and shameful to me. It should have been a case of, well, the procedure's now available, and people say, oh yeah, okay, that's the way of the world. Now, I believe that party was cultivated on purpose to try and put a parenthesis or a full stop between the Ireland that was and the Ireland of the transhumanist Ireland to come. And that was a very pivotal moment in this country, because things got very peculiar after that in terms of This is when the first of this hate speech law things started creeping in, and all other kinds of other things. And I'm an old-fashioned liberal. I really am. I mean, I'm probably liberal than many people would be, you know. But the way the world has gone, the left has pushed the parameters over, and suddenly I find myself, you know, if you're not extremely left or progressive, you're suddenly on the right. But that is because the goalposts were changed, not because I changed my opinions. I'm still this, you know, I'm still that sort of like not godless, but I'd say that liberal freak that I was when I was in my 20s and 30s. I haven't changed. I still hold those values, but there's decorum, and there's restraint, and there's, I don't know. There was something. I actually winced when I saw it on the TV. You know, it was like, this is a bit weird, you know. But I see it was deliberately done by the regime. They wanted a party to sort of kill human decency. No, I wouldn't say human decency, but kill. They wanted to offend as many people on the other side. Put it that way. The ones who were on the no side, this was a gigantic party to say, well, screw you. Nah, that kind of thing. That's the way it seemed to me. Whether I'm right or wrong, I don't know. Now, I'm not saying all the people in the crowd were like that. There may have been people that had terrible experiences in their personal lives, and something had happened, and it meant something to them that it did deeper to them than it did to me. But I got the feeling that it was a kind of an organised burlesquing, an organised humiliation ritual of the people who were against it. I mean, that's how I feel. And it seemed unsporting, it seemed cold, it seemed harsh, but most of all it seemed infantile. It seemed to be the ultimate expression of this kind of Irish insecurity thing where, when I was growing up, you know, we're backward, we're not liberal enough, we're not progressive enough. And I look back at that now and I think to myself, so what? Why do we have to apologise for that, you know? Who's holding anybody in Ireland and keeping them prisoner, you know? This kind of thing. There was always gay people. Okay, there should be laws to protect them if someone wants to beat them up and things like that, or discriminate against them in work and play. Of course, I agree with all that, but they always were here. You know, and in the past, people went to England. England is not going to. I'm starting to sound condescending here.
Some people used to say they were fine when they were here, but when they went to England, that's
yeah. But I'm trying not to be. I'm trying not to sound condescending. But I didn't like that event, and I didn't think it made me tremendously uncomfortable. That's the way I'd put it.
I don't know if it's related as such, but the Magdalen Laundries and the Tune Babies, there's a great comedian, Deirdre O'Kane, does a bit. She's been doing a bit about the Magdalen Laundries. I'm not sure if she's still doing it or not, but I remember going, wow, she's really bringing this to the front, because that's one of those secret things. We don't talk about that, so much so that they buried the information about the Tune Babies. But as far as I know, you went down there and you looked into that a bit. Maybe you can shine some light on the subject, Thomas.
Well, that was my road to Damascus moment, to use a Christian, you know, analogy. I totally fell for the whole Tune Babies thing, to the point where I made a film about it. And I've taken that film down now because I realised I was thinking over emotionally and rather than pragmatically.
Did you cancel yourself?
Yeah, I cancelled myself. That's the way it is from now on. We cancel you. Well, good luck with that. I cancel me feckin' self. But yeah, it's like my superpower, you know. But yeah, and then I changed my mind on that, and I was listening to John Waters and a few other people talk about it, and I was like, Jesus, maybe it's not true. And I know a guy who's a pathological liar near where I live. He's a Walter Mitty type. And he was on RTE telling people that he saw the nuns killing the babies and carrying wrapped up shrouds into the... And I know this guy's a nut job. He's an absolute head case. And he's a Walter Mitty, complete liar. And one of these fantasist types, you know. And he was on RTE in a documentary telling them that he saw nuns taking the little babies to the septic tank. And right there and then I said, no, he's lying. I know him. He's a pathological liar. Everyone knows him as a spoofer. And he'd be one of these fellas that would tell you that, you know, if I said I went to the moon, he'd say, oh, I was on Mars, you know, those types. And then I said, he's lying, he's a liar, he's an absolute liar. He's a cold, there's something wrong with him, he's disturbed. And he's looking for attention. And then I realised now that case on that is far from closed. You know, maybe it did happen, maybe it didn't happen, but it's not for me to jump in there and to start convicting nuns posthumously. You know, that's wrong. They may have been decent women for all I know. And so that was a great growing lesson for me. I learned to put the brakes on and cancel myself. And I think there's a good lesson there for all of us. That was a mistake I made. I jumped the gun too soon because I was caught up in some kind of emotional thing. And sometimes, and a lot of this progressive stuff is emotional stuff, you know. It's a weaponized kind of emotional thing. Oh, the poor people, oh, we have to help them and all this stuff. You know, and human beings are not all saints, you know. There's lots of, they take advantage, you know. It's the folly of humanity, you know. We're not all, you know, we're not all wonderful. And this whole, that thing like a hate speech law, it defines this parameter that most of humanity are wonderful and flawless and blameless. And anyone who points out discrepancies in the character of another person is somehow involved in hate. Have you noticed how they even changed the word hate? Years ago, like if you go online and like, I used to talk about music and I say, I don't like that. I don't like the first album, it's terrible, but the second album is great. And someone will say, I can't believe the hate I'm hearing here. No, hate and criticism, you stupid bastard, are two different things. Criticism is, you know, based on how this thing affected me and how I feel about it. Hate is when I want to go and have the band destroy it. You know, I don't like Lynyrd Skynyrd, but I didn't want the plane to go down. But everything is hate. Everything is hate, you know? And, and that's a new thing, actually. And that crept into Irish society. I was members on an Irish rock group, a music group. And there was an Irish band back in the early 70s called Skid Row. In fact, Phil Lynott was in them. And Bruce Shields, that was his band. And they were all going on, oh, great albums, great bands. And I said, you know, and all I said was, I don't really like that band. It never did. It sounded dated even when they were doing that sound. It wasn't for me. That's what I said. Well, there was all these posts by middle-aged Irishmen, all of the need going, if hate isn't stamped out on this group right now, I'm leaving. So the parameter of what represents hate has been lowered to criticism and accountability. And when you have governments creating laws that can send you to prison for criticism and accountability, we're in a very dangerous place, extremely dangerous place.
I suppose what was worrying for me is that the Minister for Children, Roderick Gorman, as far as I'm aware, he hid the papers from the Tuam situation, so we can't actually read. We don't actually know because it's hidden, like they did with the Pfizer documents. They just take it and go, oh, we'll put that away. Oh, the JFK, oh, we'll put that away. People can't see this. It will cause, with 75 years, we'll put it away, then we'll release it then. Why? How is he allowed to do that? What's going on with the hiding?
Well, the same reason Pfizer wanted the vaccine papers hidden for 75 years. Somebody's hiding something that they did that they shouldn't have done. I don't know. The hiding of the thing for 75 years, I thought maybe they wanted to go away. Maybe they wanted to be forgotten about. But I mean, if you look at all the things that are hidden, like the Warren Commission, the assassination of JFK, papers on the RFK, even Martin Luther King. Why are all these things all hidden? You know, why are all these, you know, they're hidden because somebody doesn't want certain things to be known. So it's something like that, you know. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But yeah, I understand sometimes for commercial reasons or even for sort of protecting a family or something, you could hide something in the public record. But the truth, to me, I'm a great believer in the thing that the truth is always very simple. You know, it's either yes or no. But along with this pathology of mediocrity, we also have a sort of a pathology of vagueness, where we're not told really what the rules are hard and fast. and this is everything, but you'll get into trouble if you break them. Okay, what's hate? We haven't specifically defined it, but you better not do it. You know? We're in Orwellian territory now. This is gaslighting, you know? And so if they had specific things saying, okay, you beat a person up because of their skin color, or religion, or their sexual orientation, that's hate. I would understand that.
That's a crime anyway.
That's hate. And if you did it because you didn't, for that reason, you know, not a pub fight that would have got out of hand, but actually for that reason, that's hate. But if they can set the parameters according to the vagueness of what hate is, they can actually say anything is hate. And that's very frightening, I think.
Yeah, it's good.
And it also creates a legal nightmare. When you go into the courts, the lawyers are going to, if they do pass that law, the lawyers are going to be laughing, because you will have drawn out protracted legal cases of actually trying, well, did this person commit hate crime or did they not?
Oh, so I could become a lawyer and get rich. All right, I have my next move. Guys, let's open up to the floor. If you have any questions for Thomas, now would be the time to ask them. The questions on natural law, how can that help?
Natural law is something that I have a great belief in. There is a sort of a natural law to everything. Like, I hit you for no reason. That's wrong, okay? There was no provocation, there was no reason for it. So the natural law would just to say that I'm definitely everyone would agree I was in the wrong for doing that, okay? But natural law has this remarkable ability to create an equilibrium. And it's often through very painful things. And this brings us back to the whole monomyth and the life lesson thing again, where natural law the ultimate arbiter of everything is the truth, okay? That's the ultimate arbiter of everything, the truth, not the actual process of finding the truth, but the actual truth itself. So natural law will bring up the truth no matter what. So it will often be, and this is one of the reasons they're against conspiracy theories. They attack people for conspiracy theories. So for instance, everyone who looks objectively at the JFK murder goes, oh, it's as dodgy as anything. Something definitely happened. That's natural law kicking in, because you're realizing that the full story we're being told isn't true. There's some kind of senses below you that's telling you, intuition, whatever, reading about it, that's not true, right? And we now have a situation where you have Tucker Carlson basically doing reports with millions of people saying, well, the CIA killed JFK. And Nixon knew it, Richard Nixon knew it, right? Now, Nixon, the story of that is remarkable. Nixon called the CIA director into the Oval Office and had a tape recorder running. And he said, and he'd already figured out that the CIA had killed JFK. And he said to him, who killed Jack? And it's the most bizarre response by the CIA guy. Well, I don't, yeah. Now it's either who did or who didn't, right? Or I don't know. But he avoids the question and never answers. Now, within a few weeks, this guy called Bob Woodward, and you can look this up if you don't believe me, it's incredible, suddenly shows up at the Washington Post as a reporter right after he'd left Navy intelligence. And he broke a story called Watergate. And we all thought that Richard Nixon was a crook. But now we know natural law kicked in, and we now know that the Watergate scandal was the CIA and military intelligence bringing down Richard Nixon because he knew who killed JFK and why and how it was done. That's all now coming out into the open, and that's an example of natural law. The truth has come to the surface because there's too many loose ends to patch up. Just like many people are saying, like you go on the lockdown, you talk about the lockdown now and you see it online, many people say, I can't believe they had me buying a €9 burger to have a pint. Can you believe they got away with that's natural law? People are waking up, they're emerging from the miasma. The conditioning is breaking. It's an amazing process. It's something that's remarkable, the gift that we as human beings have. It's that kind of thing, the truth emerging and seeing it, and then there's a frantic thing to block it down, passing laws, calling you a conspiracy theorist, but the truth will still emerge. You know, like I had a row with a friend who I have great respect for, and he says, Thomas, I agree with you about everything. Why do you have a problem with the COVID vax? And I said, I don't trust big corporations. And it's as simple as that. And then he goes, but they wouldn't release it. And I says, well, thalidomide. You know, when someone wants to make a fast buck, they'll release a drug. They'll do it. You know, the tobacco industry used to tell pregnant women that smoking cigarettes was good for their baby until natural law kicked in, and that was obviously a lie. So that's an example of it. That's an example that eventually people emerge. Clarity, the fog of war dissipates, and clarity emerges.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah.
Natural law, would that be connected to the bards? You know the way the bards had, there was the musicians, the artists.
Satires.
Satires.
Yeah.
But there was
There's a reason why the joker or the bard could insult the king and live. Because he was kind of like a judge. So he'd say something like in the court where, you know, our lordship, you know, he just got married. You know, I hope the queen is okay with that one that lives down in the village. And they'd all burst out laughing. But if a knight was to say that, he'd have to be dragged down to the oubliette and left there to die. So we have a tremendous history of that in this country, of the satirical bard that holds the mirror up to who we are and presents a kind of a clarity that no one else can. The satirist, you know, we've had Oscar Wilde, we've had people like that speak incredible truths. You know, Miles Nagopoling, you know, Flann O'Brien. These books are incredibly funny, but they're incredibly satirical. You know, the description of like, I am an Irishman, I'm an incurable. And you know, what was the whole thing he said? The definition of an Irish homosexual is a man who prefers women to drink.
Oscar Wilde ultimately got cancelled as well, didn't he? That was
yeah.
That's the essence
and
of
he was
that.
a Freemason, and even that didn't help him.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Remember the Apollo Lodge down here in Trinity?
Oh wow, wow, he must have really.
You can
pissed
see a
some
photograph
powerful
of him
people
in his gear.
Hello, Thomas. This is a Kerry accent.
What do you think is going to happen in America at the end of the year?
And what pantomime will we be put through before we get there?
Oh, with Trump and all that
What
stuff?
pantomime will we be put through before we get there?
Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know, you know. All indications are that it's going to be a runaway victory for Trump. But somehow I get this kind of feeling like it's not going to happen. I don't know why. Like they're going to do something. I don't know why. I have this feeling. I'm going to commit a hate crime here. I do not like Barack Obama. I don't trust that guy. I don't like him. I find him an incredibly sinister individual. He came in as the Prince of Peace, yeah, and peace. And he launched more drones, rockets, and he killed more civilians than you could actually imagine, you know. And he's suddenly on a whistle-top tour of all these NATO countries meeting the big bosses. What's that about, you know? Will they declare some kind of constitutional emergency and put him in as the steward? Because they don't want to accept, I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm just throwing it out there. But this, you know, looking into my crystal ball, which doesn't work anyway, I don't physically see Trump in the White House. I don't know why. It's the weirdest thing.
Yeah, I mean, they do say he's going to win with a landslide, but I don't know. It's really hard to guess that. So that wasn't. We gave you a non-answer there.
Yeah, sorry. I gave you a political answer.
But also, but also Thomas says he doesn't like politics. So
yeah, I hate politics, except for like trying to understand social and cultural and psychological things. You know, I get people asking me to run all the time, and I'm like, God. I'd rather chew my testicles off through an electric fence. I just despise the whole thing. I have an aversion to it. I don't know why. It's really vicious, you know. Like it's.
I'll ask you a political question, sort of. So there's the left, there's the far left, and there's the far right. Is there a place where they can meet Is there a place where is there anywhere they can all get on? Like somewhere, money, yeah, probably. Is there some sort of place that they can just, there's a bit of balance there where they won't be at each other and they can just go, all right, we all agree on that?
I saw two politicians today when I was with my friend Tess. We were having coffee in the shopping centre in Stillorgan. Two quite well-known ones. I'm so detached from it, I don't even know their names, but I can recognise their face from seeing them on TV. The insincerity of it. I'm sure there's nice people in politics on some planet, but I'm sure there's nice people in politics in Ireland. I don't want to be nasty about it. There's a lack of truth there. There's a lack of direct honesty, a lack of that vagueness again, you know. Just tell us what the truth is. You hate us or you love us, it's okay, either answer will do. You know, don't play mind games. It seems to be an endless circus of gaslighting, you know. But I always remember when the Lisbon vote happened and it was rejected the first time, they were saying things like, we need more robust democracy and we better educate the population. They just said no. And they started to change their tactics, and for the second vote, I saw posters around Dublin. I was working here at the time, and there's a picture of a woman like this, and she's all forlorn. I'm safer in Europe, implying that Irish men will batter the shit out of their women if we vote no the second time. You know, she'll have better protection in Europe from domestic abuse and all this stuff, and it just seemed to be like. They love to talk about democracy, but they're the most undemocratic people in the world. Like, the no vote, loads of them were saying things like, well, the next generation will get the yes, you know? Yeah, this kind of thing.
Sinn Féin was saying...
No, don't talk about them.
She was saying that if she was in power, she'd get us to vote again.
Yeah, she'd reword it in Arabic, you know, that's what she would do. Yeah. And no offence to Arabic and that kind of singing, it's beautiful, but I'm just as I find, okay, telescopic philanthropy. You ever heard of that one? This was a Victorian concept that was developed in Victorian England, where you had tremendous poverty in places like the East End of London. People would be just horrific poverty. These are Jack the Ripper days. But they had everybody wondering about the poor people in the colonies. So there was an English satirical magazine called Punch, and it showed like Gladstone or some British politician looking through a telescope at all the poor people in India, and there was all starving English kids at his feet. Now that's a tactic used so much, telescopic philanthropy. They keep you looking over there so you don't pay attention down here. And it has nothing to do with compassion, it has nothing to do with decency. It has everything to do with creating distractions, big time. Now, I don't get this whole thing that we have a common struggle with anyone. We have empathy, compassion, and we can give help. But this idea of a common struggle, I don't get. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it applies to either their culture in the Middle East or our culture here. But yeah, Sinn Féin has made an industry on this thing. In fact, it's almost like the only thing they stand for. And, you know, you will often see them, the so-called Nationalist Party, marching with more Palestinian flags and tricolours, even if there's even a tricolour there. And what is that all about? That makes no sense to me. I get you could have compassion for those people and what they're going through, but how is that going to fix potholes in Cavan? How is that going to end hospital queues in Finglas? How is that going to fix cost of living rates, in Cork? And that's telescopic philanthropy, because they don't have, by addressing greater climate change. Look at the fucking sky.
The great
it's
enemy.
Dying. The polar bears are drowning, even though they're fantastic swimmers. The only chance you could fix that pothole down to the end of the street. Yeah, but what would Greta say? But it's like the Emperor's New Clothes, no one calls them out. You know, no one calls them out ever. I totally
Are you a
get
climate denier, Thomas?
I'd like to announce my running as a candidate for the. But anyway,
Green Party.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, carbon taxes. What? How does that benefit a polar bear?
Do you know what they're doing in Dunleary, actually? From my limited knowledge, it looks to me that it's going to be really bad for business, but they're just closing all the roads off and making people drive all the way around, but they've loads of bicycle lanes. But this isn't just here, this is like all over the country.
You've opened a can of worms here.
Yeah, go on, get us going about bicycle lanes.
You know the way earlier on he asked me, did they replace Catholicism with wokeism, was it? They replaced it in many countries with the climate change cult. Yeah. What is carbon taxes? Plenary indulgences, penance. You must suffer for your sins. Original sin of being a human. And they've taken the apocalypse, the end of the world, the end of time, the sky is falling, the second coming. All these same things have been hardwired into the whole climate change agenda. Why? Because we're back to the old thing I spoke at the beginning. Archetypes, tropes, means, forms. They will actually find them and they will just change the language. They'll change the narrative. So instead of waiting for the Jesus to return, you're heading for carbon zero carbon. Instead of saying confession at the confession box, you're paying your carbon taxes. And they turn it into, it's a middle class religion. It really is. I'm sorry, middle class people, but it's a middle class religion. For some of you, and the more you go up the economic scale, the more it becomes a faith-based religion. It's as clear as anything. And you go back to the Dark Ages and you see people in rags with scabs on them and outside going, oh, the sky is falling, it's the end of the world, we're being judged for our sins. And you could take the same people and bring them 1,000 years into the future and they'd be down in Dalkey going, the sky is falling, the carbon levels are going higher. It's the same thing, the same archetype, the same thing comes back. And I want to talk, little can of worms. A lot of the people who are the most fanatical, progressive, wokey types, cancel culture types, you will find that they come from families that were the most hardcore Catholic ones back in the day. They're just changed their religion. They would have had grandparents who would have been the ones who thought Archbishop McQuaid was great. Your one next door, she's gone 3 months, put her in a Magdalen laundries. And you would find that those same families today are the ones who are the most the cancel culture ones. The archetypes never change. It just changes through history. It's just a new religion comes in that takes place. But the same archetypes, the same things come happen.
Well, I have very Catholic grandparents, but there was different. They were really good. They were the really good ones. They weren't like, I just believe this no matter what. They really cared. They were like the best version of Catholics. What I'm trying to say is I'm great. I'm not like them.
Yeah,
so I'm not saying I'd agree with you always, but there's certain types of Catholics that might have been very attached to following the rules at the expense of other people. But that's not all Catholics. I'm defending Catholics here.
But you know these climate change people, and I'm terribly concerned about my carbon footprint.
That's why I bought a Tesla, you see.
While me and Marcella were on our way to Bali to attend the climate change conference, I was confronted with the most disgusting scenario. A family from Flinders were flying to Tenerife on Ryanair. Now what can we do about these people? What can we do? We'll have to do something. Now I'd like to get that mother. Oh, sorry. I'd like to get that person in a room. Okay, I just committed another hate crime, appropriation. I'd like to get that person in a room that's like Mr. Green Party, from Dalkey or somewhere. No offense, and say, do you really believe what you're saying, or are you just spewing virtue to appear superior? Because there seems to be a class element in it when you can have all your goodies and all your trips to Thailand, but you have an issue with someone who takes a Ryanair flight to Benidorm. And do you really believe it, or are you just looking for the belief that you're closer to the carbon Jesus than the rest of us? And I think I'd be right. I'd love to just say, do you really believe it, or are you grandstanding? And those holy rollers in the past would have been the same. You said your family were genuinely good people, right? But the ones who would have been the holy rollers, the ones who would have thought Archbishop Grade was fantastic and we should lock up all the women and do Magdalen laundries and all these. If you were to ask them the same question, it'd be the same thing. Do you really have a genuine faith, or are you grandstanding? You know, it's a powerful distinction when you think about it. What's real and what's grandstanding? You know, what's real and what's showing off? What's real and the need to feel superior to others? That superficiality is dangerous when it enters into public life. I mean, they'd love a climate lockdown if they could get one. You can see it, they're edging for it. In fact, Micheál Martin...
Which would be good for you.
Micheál Martin said last week we need a COVID response to the immigration thing. Did you hear that?
What's that mean?
What that means, I'll tell you what that means. That means coppers patrolling the streets, making sure that no one's complaining, that they're locked down, and like everything else, it seems to be a restriction primarily on the working class. Remember, far right is nothing more than code word for working class. That's the end of that. I don't care. There's nothing else. When you hear someone say far right, they're saying working class.
Well, I get called far right all the time, so are they trying to say I'm not from Dalkey? That'd actually be correct. I'm from Meath.
You're not though, but you're from a regular neighbourhood.
I'm from Meath in Rathfarnham,
yeah.
But I happen to live there.
So always remember that. That's a code word for working class. It's terrible. It's nasty. You know, it's a class system again. And that's what it is. Now, I'm going to, as I'm here deep behind enemy lines, and I came on the Dart, and as soon as I left Pearse Street Station, it was like 1970s Ireland. It was... Everyone was the Brady Bunch, or everyone was Snow White Irish person. There was almost no minorities all along that Dart line along the coast. Right? Yeah, when you go on the north side, it's different. And I don't know how it is, but I'm along this coast, I'm just saying, along the Dart line, you could see how, when you have enough money, that puts you in a position to economically isolate yourself. See, the ones who are screaming far right are often the ones imposing an economic apartheid on the working class. They can say it because they're sheltered by their money. Now, I'm not playing the class thing like, you know, you're all a bunch of snobs and I'm wonderful from Ballymun. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying, okay, what is your kid being the only kid in the class who who speaks English, right, and can't communicate with all the other kids because they're kids they're refugees? What is a bottleneck in your public hospitals because the population explosion caused directly by immigration? Remember, we blame the politicians, never the immigrants. What is 1,000 men living next door to your granny, and they could be decent guys, but she's an old lady and she's nervous? What are real, tangible problems that these people have in places like East Wall, Finglas, Ballymun, Fermoy, other towns around the country, to the chattering classes, is great ethnic food, because they're economically sheltered from the direct realities of the impact of thousands of immigrants arriving in their neighbourhoods. That's what it is. It's as simple as that. And because they're not in East Wall, so it's they're horrible people in East Wall. They're all race. You're not living there. You're not living in East Wall. You're not living in Ballymun. You're not living in Newtown Kennedy. So you can't sit there and say that if you're living in a neighbourhood that's everyone's. But this goes on all over the world. Let me tell you something. When I lived in New York, this is one of the reasons I left. Manhattan was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. It was working class millionaires, stockbrokers, carpenters, all kinds of different, every culture, every race all living together riding the subway, until somebody decided one day they were going to gentrify Manhattan. And then the working class were moved out to Long Island and Queens and out to Brooklyn and the Bronx. And then they decided they wanted to replace them with immigrants. Now, and that's what's happening here. They're replacing the working class with what they see as a kind of a servant class. We've heard on RTE, BBC, and American things, well, if we stop immigration, who's going to service our lattes? Who's going to clean our toilets? Well, that used to be the working class locals, wasn't it? So these are people that have a mentality towards the immigrants that's far more pathological than the people in Ballymun and everywhere else who live next door to them. They see them as their coolies and their manservants. And that's been shown time and time again. They'll never directly admit it, but that's exactly how they see them. And that's why when the first thing out of their mouth is, well, who's going to clean the toilets if we have no immigrants? Because that's what they see all they're good for. That's how they really see them. They have a colonialist mentality at home. And that's what's going on.
Well said. Well said.
I'm not being political. This is social observation.
How can we get it to a stage where people are able to talk about it and be open and honest and have a fair sort of look at it from a media where people could be heard
Don't be
confronted.
confrontational about it. If someone around in a posh neighbourhood says, well, I don't really like what's going on in the East Wall, say to them, well, do you know what it's really like there? Well, I read what I saw the Irish Times, but I mean, do you really know what it's like there? And then, no, you can find, I'm a great believer in discourse and communication. I'm a believer in there's a great power in that. And the secret of that is to take people away from their political left-right thing, or, their political, or that thing. And just like I was saying earlier on, I said, in terms, okay, forget the fact that you vote for a mainstream party and you think that everyone in East Wall, say, is a bigot, okay? Now, just imagine your grandmother had 1,000 men or 500 men she didn't know, who didn't speak English, living next door, an 80-year-old lady. How would she react? Well, I'm sure she'd be a bit nervous, I'm sure. Well, there's your answer to the question. That's your hatred right there. It's not hatred, it's human behavior. It's how people are. And there's no consideration. I find it really horrible that there's a lot of these neighbourhoods where they are being flooded with immigrants. And remember, one of the things that makes me very proud of being Irish right now is that we haven't descended into any kind of national front mentality. We've gone after the politicians, and we should be very proud of that. You go up to Ballymun, you see people, it's very mixed up there and has been for many years, and there's no problems between them. It's the politicians they hate, not the people they're bringing in. I think it's wonderful that we've been like that, and it's something I hope we definitely must have to keep going. But the politicians, the bureaucrats, the globalists, the Eurocrats, they are the real. They must always be our target, and of course the mainstream media, who are their press agency, and they're not impartial or anything. Just talk to people, and express it in terms of, like, as a decent human being, how would that make you feel? And there's tremendous power in that. And I did that with a few people out of Enoch Burke, and they're like, well, he has to be locked up, doesn't he? He's a head case, he's a religious nut job. And I said, no, if you were just put your position in his family and his mother and him, how would it feel? And he goes, I guess it would be pretty awful. And then there's that magical moment where dogma dissipates and human decency comes to the fore. And I think that's the answer. I think one of the reasons that the left-wing progressive on the extreme left scream and shout and call people's names is because they don't have an argument, because it's all rooted in dogma. But I think the power of people who are trying to, and I'm not saying I'm on the right, I'm an anarchist, I'd be definitely someone in the very middle, would be maturity, honesty, back up your facts, and appeal to people's humanity. I think that's a great one. I think that has already worked for me in lots of ways. And
Thomas, if you don't mind me saying, it sounds very Christian for a pagan.
It's actually very pagan, believe it or not, because I read Socrates, Touché, but yeah.
Touché, right back in. Take that. That's French, by the way.
Why is it now the psychopathic control grids wish that people of European stock do not see themselves as rooted to anywhere?
Well, there's a lot of brainwashing. For instance, you had colonial history, so there's a constant thing that the European colonial powers did terrible things all across the world. That's a weapon that can be used. There's a thing that somehow we plundered the resources of the third world in Europe and the West, and we should have to pay for that by exterminating ourselves. But that's literally what they're saying, you know. And that doesn't apply to Ireland. We never had colonies. We never invaded other countries, well, other than Wales, but, you know, that was for the sheep. But, you know, back in the 5th century. But we never, well, and bits of Scotland, same reason. But, in fact, we invaded Scotland to attack the Romans and we drive them out of Britain. So the British owe us, by the way. That's why Scotland is called Scotland. It's an Irish tribe called the Scotty.
After Queen Scotia.
Yeah. And so that doesn't apply to us. We don't have that history. And but neither do British people, neither do French people that are living today, unless they're aristocrats. Funny enough, they always say they're always immune to this. Have you seen who's to blame for the British Empire? The English working class. What gives? You know, how is someone that lives in Preston or Lancashire or in Manchester or Birmingham, how are they responsible for some aristocrat who had a colonial slave sugar plantation in the West Indies? I'm still trying to figure that one out. And again, it's transference. That we're back to the whole thing that far right is code word for working class, or native working class. When I say native, I mean European native working class. And I remember when at the Black Lives Matter thing, they had them pushing down statues in places like Bristol University. Did you hear them all? Smash the statue! Smash the statue! He was a slaver! Smash the statue! And a fellow dreadlocks. His great-grandfather would have been the colonial attaché in the Transvaal. His great-uncle, I know someone who directly comes from a colonialist past in Africa and grew up with coolies and manservants and all that stuff, and grandpapa on the Transvaal and all that thing. And they're vehemently involved in the pro-immigration open borders thing on the open border side, and calling everyone racists. Again,
is that to make up
the
for their
class
past?
element of this is not to be underestimated. It's very profound, and even if some of you out here are not working class, I don't think I even am anymore. But anyway, try to understand that, you know. And there's another thing too I'll say as well. They flood the country with people, and they say, and the natives are going, we're being wiped out. But I got news for you. When they're done with us, they'll then move on them. So don't think that the party stops with us being taken care of. They will move on to the next ones, because that's the nature of this vicious class system. And I'm not a commie or a socialist, but the class system is a reality in terms of the globalization effects it has on everybody, including, you know, or people in the West and so on, of all colours and races. But yeah, I want to know why so many children of the establishment are so heavily involved in the extreme left-wing progressive stuff here. You know, what's that about?
There's protests in Trinity at the moment. I just saw some video today.
Did you know how pussyfooted they got? Did you see how the politicians were like, that's a disgrace for the way they treat these people? Meanwhile, send the water cannons into Newtown and Kennedy, and you think it's not a class thing.
Which is quite a nice area too, to be fair. Is there a way that Catholicism could be more Irish, like include the Holy Wells and the pre-Christian Ireland, a way of combining the two?
Yeah, that's absolutely something I think has a fantastic potential. But I'm going to go one step further. I actually believe that we should start worshipping this country like it's a god or a goddess. Yes. Yeah. In fact, it is a goddess, the goddess Eru, right? And that is not the antithesis of being a Catholic or a Protestant or anything else you are here. History has shown us time and time again that both those things are compatible. But I honestly believe, without sounding chauvinistic, that this country is unbelievably special, and I've been all over the world. There's something on this island that the great powers of the world have wanted for the longest time. And we have it, and I don't think there's anything corny about worshipping Ireland. I used to be very kind of like jealous of how the Americans elevated America to a kind of a deity, and the people, the Americans, they like the state of God bless America. And I'd be like, I wish we were like that about Ireland. I wish we felt that way about Ireland. And I know people that are not even Irish feel that way about Ireland. The sad thing is many people who are Irish don't feel that way about it. And I think that it's almost like a garden of consciousness, that if we, it's like when you fertilize a garden full of flowers or vegetables, they grow. When you fertilize a love for Ireland, it will flower and fruit in ways that we could hardly imagine. And another thing too is that we've neglected our diaspora. Now, I'm not talking about the fella or the girl who goes off to Melbourne or London and has a great time working or whatever. I'm talking about we don't fully respect our Irish Americans. I used to be the kind of one that an Irish American would come with me and he goes, you know, I'm Irish too, man. Where are you from? And you go, you know, I'm from Chicago. And I used to be the type, nah, you're not really. But you know what I do? These days, know what I do? I say, I'm Irish. Where are you from? Philadelphia. Come on home. Come on home, brother. You're one of us. They don't want us feeling that way. And if we reach out to our diaspora, no matter if it's the 15th generation, Shannon Nee Flanagan in whatever the name is, you know, Sean Riverdance in Los Angeles, that's the family, that's the diaspora, and we've made them feel left out. And you look, I mean, it took someone like Michael Flatley to show us what we were. A builder from Chicago who was good at dancing, and look at the industry he created out of Irish dancing. And how many millions of Michael Flatleys are out there that can do the same for this country in other ways. So that's how I'm starting to feel about it. Love Ireland and bring the tribe back home, all of them, in one way or another. One quick addendum to that. We have to reach out to the unionist and the loyalist community in the north. We have to say the Sinn Féin don't talk for us, okay? They don't talk for us. And we're perfectly happy. We're perfectly happy with you being on this island, maintaining your culture. Let's share this magical land together. That's never been said to them. And you know something, if it was said to them, we'd get results.
Yes.
Yeah. Thomas, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, thanks everybody for coming. I was tremendously nervous when I started this tonight. I don't get nervous. My hand was actually shaking coming up the stairs. And I've talked in front of 1,000 people and not been nervous. I don't know what it was.
It's this lot.
Yeah, it's this lot, but it's this lot for the right reason. I think I'm now coming to terms with the fact that there's something really happening. And I've sort of thrown my hat in the ring. And it's a bit of a responsibility like you have and other people here have in their own kind of way. And that nervousness was anticipation of the rejuvenation of ERA.